Hi everyone, and welcome to this next tutorial in the Xamarin iOS series. In this one, we're going to create a tabbed app, which is a kind of app with a bunch of buttons that sit at the bottom of your iPhone, and when you press them, it changes to a different page. And it's probably the most common kind of app you will see in iOS applications. So open up Xamarin, click New Solution, and go to our usual spot of iOS Unified API Universal. And then scroll down, and you'll see this tabbed application here. So click that and then call it anything you like. Tabbed application. And click OK. And then once your project's loaded, you'll notice there's one extra file inside your root folder here. Whereas before we only had one view controller in previous tutorials, now we have two. There's a second view controller. Okay. And to get a look at what that's actually doing, we're going to open up this main storyboard iPhone storyboard file. And that'll tell us exactly what it's trying to do. This always takes a while, and I have no idea why. It's just a text file that they represent on screen with some images. Okay, now that it's opened, you look here, I'm going to zoom out a little. We have something called a Tabbar Controller. And within that controller, we have two arrows that come off of it, one into first view and one into second view. So there's your two arrows. And then if you look at your controller, you have a button that says first and one that says second. And if you go back one stage further, you have this arrow here that goes into your Tabbar Controller, and all that's saying is that this is loading up at the start of your application. So to make sure you understand what's going on here, we're going to add another view controller and another tab in our application. So come over to your toolbox, scroll down, and drag a view controller onto the screen. There we go. I'm just going to move this over here so it's easier to see. Move it down a little. There we go. God, this is really painful. Okay, so at the moment you have a view controller here, but it's not related to this tab controller in any way. And the way you relate the two is you hold down the control button, click in your Tabbar controller, and drag to your new view controller and release. And then it will ask you how you want to relate these two. So you can either have a tab or some other stuff here, which I'll go into much later. So click tab, and you'll see an arrow comes out of Tabbar controller and down to our view controller. And if I zoom in our Tabbar controller, we now have first, second, and item, which is what this view controller is called. So in this view controller, if you click the, where is it? There we go. If you click that bar at the bottom, you can change that item to anything you like. So you come over here, and we'll be really inventive and call it third. There we go. Now you notice that the first and second view controllers have a nice image here that we would like. So let's click on third and come over to Tabbar item, and you can choose an image. Let me just open this a little. Where it says selected image. If you click down, you have two choices, first or second. So these images must be coming from somewhere. So we'll just click first for now. And that hasn't actually loaded anything. So let's go over here and see why. Oh, I've clicked the wrong thing. Delete that one, come to bar item, and change your image in there. Now it should appear. There we go. So those images are coming from somewhere, and in iOS, they always come from the resources folder, directly under the resources folder. You can put them in other folders under here, but then you would have to say images / whatever your images was. Now when your app gets compiled, all of these things in resources get transported to the root of your application, so it's just one big mess of files. And that's the crazy way that Apple do things, and I don't know why they do it like that. But they do. So if you right click the image file and you go down to build action, you'll notice it's labeled as bundle resource. Now most things have to be called a bundle resource or an image asset. In this case, bundle resource means it does that thing I just described. It takes your file and puts it in the root directory in a big jumble of messes. So you have to make sure your file names are unique. Okay, and if you look down here a bit more, it also says first at 2 times. Now, because you have so many different iPhones and iPads with Retina screens and lower resolution screens, you have to give it a few options, because if you try to display a low resolution image on an iPad Retina, it would look horrible and your users wouldn't think your app was very well made. That's why you include high resolution versions of your images and you name them specially according to Apple documents with at 2 times or at 3 times. And you can go on the Apple developer website and they'll tell you all about this. But just to make you aware, that's what you need to do. Okay, so now we have 3 tabs and we have a Tabbar controller. And over here, if we close this resources, we have a first view controller and a second view controller. But we have 3 views. How come we don't have a third view controller here? Well, we have to create it. Just because it's here doesn't mean it exists yet. And to do the creation of that, click on your grey bar, go over to your properties, click on class, and then call it something. Third view controller, for example. Now the reason we repeat the word view controller in the name of our class is so that later when we're looking at our code files here, we understand exactly what's doing what. And that's extremely important when you're programming. Otherwise you can get yourself in a massive mess of what they call spaghetti code. You have to know what everything's doing, so you name everything really obviously. So now that you've typed third view controller, tap enter, and if you come over here, we now have a third view controller, like all the rest. Okay, so let's run that in our simulator. I'm running on an iPhone 5. I haven't caught up with the cool kids yet. I don't have an iPhone 6. Here's our iOS simulator, and it puts a splash screen for you saying tabbed application. And once it's loaded, you have first, second, and third. And when you click them, you go second and third. There we go. Okay, stop your simulator and zoom out. Now, if you recall from my first tutorials, we manipulated these files called viewcontroller.cs. So let's open up second view controller, and that's the one that Xamarin created for us. And you'll see in here we have a whole bunch of methods that Xamarin automatically puts in. And before, when we did this in, I think it was tutorial 2, I simply said we're only interested for now in view did load. But you have all kinds. View will appear, view did appear, will disappear, and did disappear. If you double click third view controller, you've only got that. Okay. Now, if you're not familiar with the world of object-oriented programming, whenever you create a class, which is what this is, the third view controller, and you inherit from UI view controller, you have to have what's called a constructor in it. So this public third view controller, which has the same name as the class, is called the constructor. And this is the thing that your program will call whenever you say, I want a new version of this class called third view controller. And that's true anywhere in the C# world or Java world or any object-oriented programming world. Okay, so we want to have all of these methods available to us in our third view controller, and we want especially view did load. So you could do one way by copying all of this to your third view controller, but let's do it the more programmer kind of way. If we go here, we're going to type public, and then we're going to type override. Now override just says there's a method that already exists with this name in it somewhere in the class of UI view controller. And what we're going to do is we're going to hijack it and we're going to do stuff with it instead of just letting it do its own stuff. So you've typed override, click it, and when you type space, you'll get a whole bunch of options. And these were all the options that you saw in your second and first view controllers. So you can scroll down and you've got so many. And we know the one we want is view did load. So let's type view did load, and there it is. Now when you double click it, it'll give you this base.view did load. We won't worry about that for now, but we always want that there. And then usually at this point I'll say content starts here. And then from this point you can create text views, label views, and anything. And just for completeness, we'll create a text view, but we're going to do it with a slight difference this time. Instead of writing it in code, we're actually going to do this inside our storyboard file, which will give you a nice introduction to that idea. So save that, go over to your storyboard, and then zoom in a little on your third view controller. Come over to your toolbox and scroll down, and you can put anything you like here. So don't listen to the things that I'm putting in, do whatever you want. Let's put a label. Seems to be our favorite thing of the day. So we have our label. If you double click the text part, you can edit away. So I'm going to type I like cheese. There we go. And you'll notice it doesn't fit on the screen. So I'm going to click that and drag these handles out to the side, and that will expand the size. Now if you look down here, we have this little warning triangle, and if I click it, it says one constraint needed for Y position. That's simply saying that this label isn't constrained in any way, because when you run this on different devices, they have different resolutions, different screen sizes. This label is just going to kind of float around and sit where it thinks it should be, and you never want to have that happen in programming. You don't want to leave things to their own devices, because that's when it goes wrong. So we're going to put some constraints on it. So you click the label and then click it one more time, and you get these handles that appear. So if you drag the handle at the side over to here, it'll anchor it to this side. Same with here, it'll anchor it there. Ooh, it doesn't like that, does it? Ah, it's because there's a conflict between them. So I'm just going to delete this top one. Here we go. Get our handles back again. I'm going to anchor that to the top. And once you've constrained it, so it's constrained in the upwards direction and the horizontal, that little triangle will go away and say, okay, it's fully constrained now. And of course, you can still move it around. That's no problem. So I'll have it at the top there. I like cheese. Because I do. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to run it. And when our simulator loads up, here we go. Let's see if I really do like cheese. We have first, second, and third. And it says I like cheese. Now you'll notice, even though I moved the box in my actual Xamarin, so in Xamarin it's up here at the top of the screen, you have this little box down here. And that simply says, you've given me a bunch of constraints, so even though you've moved I like cheese there, I'm actually going to display it in this box here. And that's why you still have I like cheese here. So if you go back to Xamarin and you stop that, and you click on these little lines here, and you come over to properties, it'll tell you the various properties. So that's 85 decimal points away from this edge, according to this line. If I click on this line that says 141, it'll say the first item is the top of my label, and it's going to be equal to the top layout guide, and it'll be separated by 188. And that's why it's down here. So you can change those values to your heart's content. And always remember that when you're creating an application, people are going to run this on a variety of devices with different resolutions. So keep that in mind when you position your buttons and labels and texts in this way. Okay, I think that pretty much concludes it for creating a tabbed application. Thanks for listening. Oh, and if you have any questions, then please post them at the bottom of this channel. I might even do a video on them.